Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consul, your host. In addition to being the host of this podcast and interviewing novelists, I am a novelist myself. I have 3 published novels. My latest is titled Lolita Firestone, a supernatural novel, and it is set in Sedona, Arizona and Cairo, Egypt. My previous novel is titled Family Recipes, a novel about Italian culture, Catholic guilt, and the culinary crime of the century. And my first novel is named Hardwood, a novel about college basketball and other games young men play. And that story deals with issues ranging from depression and racism to sex, religion, and university politics. All 3 novels are listed in the episode notes. I hope you will buy them, I hope you will read them, and I hope you will thoroughly enjoy them. Now, on with our program.
In the spotlight is Thomas Wolfe, the famed American novelist, and Joseph Bentz, professor of American literature at Azusa Pacific University, who serves as the articles editor for the Thomas Wolfe Review. His articles on Wolfe have also appeared in Studies in Short Fiction and the North Carolina Literary Review. He is a 4-time winner of the Zelda and Paul Gitlin Literary Prize. Bentz serves on the board of directors of the Thomas Wolfe Society. He earned his PhD in American literature at Purdue University, where he wrote his dissertation on Wolfe under the direction of Wolfe scholar Leslie Field. Bentz is also the author of 11 books. And of course, Joseph Bentz is here to illuminate on the life and literary career of the great American novelist Thomas Wolfe. He was born in Asheville, North Carolina. I've been there numerous times. If you've never been there, Asheville, North Carolina is one of the great cities in America, a smaller scale city in the mountains, beautiful colors in the fall and so on. He was born there in 1900 and died in Baltimore, Maryland in 1938, living only 37 years. But that was enough for him to make an indelible literary impression. We're going to learn all about Thomas Wolfe from one of the experts on the subject, Joseph Bentz. Joseph, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. I love talking about Thomas Wolfe.
Well, we'll do plenty of that for the next hour. So let's start with what was distinctive about Thomas Wolfe's writing style.
Wolfe has what I would call a big writing style. His books are big and long. They're 700 pages long. It's a very immersive style. What I mean by that is that there's not a carefully structured plot that just takes you through the plot in a traditional way, but Wolfe really immerses the reader in this world, this fictional version of Asheville, at least in Homeward Angel, and then New York City and all around the world, really, Paris, England, wherever the character happens to be. It's a very lyrical style. It's very emotional at times. So Wolfe was not, he wrote in the modernist era in American literature, but he's not doing it like Hemingway did it or Fitzgerald. He's much more effusive in his style. And people who love Wolfe just love that. Of course, critics will say that they wish some of that could be more controlled. But Wolfe really wanted to just put it all out there. And so what I love about his style is you just get lost in this world and you just get carried along on the flow of it.
And, nowadays, well, I think it's probably always been the case. Most readers, it seems, or most bestsellers out there are very heavily plot driven. People like a story they want it to go place to place, event to event, and so on. But Thomas Wolfe was not that kind of writer, obviously, as you're saying. And we have many writers today who are not plot driven, but they write is the beauty of their writing or the situations that they put you in. And that was very much Thomas Wolfe's situation, as you're saying. Let's go back to the beginning with that. He grows up in Asheville, North Carolina. Was there anything significant in his youth that informs us about his writing, other than, say, he uses Asheville as a locale?
Yes, and so he's a very autobiographical writer. So his growing up years were crucial for the writing that he did. He grew up his mother, Julia Wolfe, ran a boarding house in Asheville. Asheville was a town where, kind of a resort town, but also a town where people came. If they had tuberculosis, they would come there for better weather and better air and so on. And she ran this boarding house, and Wolfe grew up there. And his father was a stonecutter, had a stonecutter shop there on the main square in Asheville. And Wolfe did not like the boarding house. As you know, when you read Look Homeward Angel, he felt that, because he was living with strangers all the time, and his mother was very busy running this boarding house. So, and he was the youngest. So at times he felt neglected, I think. He had brothers and sisters, but he was lonely at times, I think. He did have a really good teacher, Mrs. Roberts, who helped bring out the artistic side of him and the writer in him. And he, for the rest of his life, really felt grateful to her for how she encouraged him as a writer. So she had a big influence. So there were important good influences in his growing up years, but also a lot of pain in it. And that's what you read about in Look Homeward Angel.
So his mother, a bit of an absentee mother, it sounds like. He's surrounded by strangers a lot of the time. I would imagine that maybe he was too young at the time, but I would imagine that would make for some great characters, because you're seeing these people who from a variety of different backgrounds. Dad was probably working a lot. You said was a stone cutter, is that right?
Stone cutter, and W.O. Wolfe was his name, and he was a very larger than life character, and Wolfe portrays that in Look Homeward Angel. I mean, he's even called W.O. in the novel, and that's his name in real life. What Wolfe did with Look Homeward Angel is some of the characters who had died, he just some of the real people who had died, family members, he just gave them their actual names. He didn't even change the names when he turned them into characters. So his brother Ben in real life is called Ben in the novel. So this shows you how closely autobiographical it was. But his father was, the Shakespeare quoting, big rhetoric that would come out of him. He got drunk and would go on sprees, and so a very big character. And then Julia, the mother, was more, she's very frugal and stingy, and she loved Tom and did her best with him. She wasn't really stingy with him. Later on, she really helped him pay for his education and was always there for him. She loved him, she cared about him. It's just that he had to fit in with her business, and so she was very business oriented. Later she really got into real estate and was very interested in that, in addition to the boarding house. So the parents were very different people, but they make fascinating characters, and the brothers and sisters do too. So I think that even though it's a dysfunctional family that he grew up in, the great thing is that if you become a writer, you can redeem that dysfunction by writing about it and making a great novel.
Exactly. Now let's back up to what you said about how he didn't even change the name of characters that were drawn from real life. For instance, you mentioned his brother Ben, who shows up as Ben. Now, D.H. Lawrence did the same thing. He became excoriated in his own town because he had the same names of the people in his town, and they felt betrayed and embarrassed and maybe misunderstood and so on. Was that a thing of the times, or why was, I don't know that you can speak for D.H. Lawrence, but why did Thomas Wolfe not at least change the names to protect the innocent and guilty?
Well, what happened was that when Scribner's accepted the novel for publication, and Wolfe worked with the great editor Maxwell Perkins, who was also Hemingway's editor and Fitzgerald's editor, they were going through the manuscript, working on editing it. And that's when Perkins realized, it had not come up before, that some of the characters in this novel, some characters who were maybe townspeople that were in some sort of scandal. Wolfe writes about the novel is in many ways about the town itself. He's writing about these people that were involved in secrets and scandals, and it slipped out really that Wolfe had used their actual names. Perkins was horrified by this, not for any literary reason, but for the fear of libel lawsuits. And eventually, in his writing, with his other writing, Wolfe was sued, and Scribner's a couple times, for libel, because his portrayal of characters, even when he changed their names, it was so similar that he got sued a few times. So publishers Perkins in particular, were very worried about that. But of course, I can't be sued by someone who is no longer living. So he let it go for those characters who that the real life counterpart was no longer alive.
Now, did they lose those lawsuits, or were those lawsuits thrown out because Thomas Wolfe had already passed away?
Well, one of them, and this is another thing, that Wolfe was involved in a number of lawsuits throughout his career, especially later on. And not all of them were libel. One that he was involved in had to do with a manuscript dealer was treating his manuscripts, trying to sell them, and that they had come up with a deal, but it all went bad. These lawsuits just drove Wolfe crazy. He would get really obsessed with them. Not so much that the money amounts weren't such a big deal, but just that the sense of injustice, and he would just get angry, and it would really prevent him from writing. But one of them was settled out of court for an amount. I think the other one he won. So I forget now exactly how all of them were disposed of, but
well, writer's license, hopefully. I mean, you got to give writers some license. Although it's a simple thing to just change names. I mean, it's unfortunately he didn't do that.
Well, and the one that they settled for quite a bit of money was not even. He had changed the name of that woman. It was a woman that had been a landlady where Wolfe lived, and he had portrayed her as Mad Maud Whitaker. And she sued. Might have been able to win in court, but one of the things is that his editors, Maxwell Perkins, realized that these things were too distracting for Wolfe. You know how just certain things, some people can just, blow it off or just, take it in stride. But for some reason, anything legal, Wolfe would just really be distracted by it, and it would keep him from writing. He even had to. He had to sue, or he was in a lawsuit with his former agent, so that became another one. So in the 1930s, he was pretty much always in a lawsuit.
So we were a litigious society even way back then. So Maxwell Perkins, a legendary editor, you mentioned Hemingway and Fitzgerald.
Yes.
And so he obviously felt that Thomas Wolfe's writing style, he didn't go to Thomas Wolfe and say, you could really cut the word count by 20%. Let's tighten this thing up. He got what Thomas Wolfe was doing, the expansive writing, the effusive style. I'm assuming that's the case because he sat down with Thomas Wolfe and worked on the manuscripts with him and saw them through to publication. So he got what Thomas Wolfe was doing. Is that the case, or did Thomas Wolfe fight even the great Maxwell Perkins and say, I don't want to change that?
Oh, they had epic battles over the manuscripts. Now, you're right that Perkins did get Wolfe. He thought Wolfe's work was genius, and he wanted to publish it, but the manuscripts would just be too big for commercial publishing. So Perkins, and then later Wolfe's later editor for the two books that ended up being published after his death, the two novels. Both of them were interested in literary issues, but they were also commercial publishers. They had to publish books that could be sold, and there are financial issues. And so you can't publish a 2,000-page book, for example, that's a novel. So Wolfe's work had to be cut back. It had to be put in publishable form. And so this is where Perkins helped Wolfe. And, some of what he did was controversial, and some of what Aswell later did was controversial. But ultimately, it helped Wolfe to channel this creative energy into commercially publishable novels.
So he wrote, Thomas Wolfe wrote, his manuscripts were even longer than what was published. So Max Perkins, as you say, did get what he was doing, but at the same time said, we need to take the size of this thing down below a doorstopper.
Right. Especially with, Look, Homeward Angel was cut back some. It was originally called Oh Lost, and it was longer than Look, Homeward Angel, which is also, which is already very long. So that was cut back. It's been since then published. The original manuscript has been published as Oh Lost. It's a very interesting thing to see because some of the scenes that were cut were restored, and people who love Wolfe love that. But we can also see, at least I can see, why Perkins made the decisions that he did. But with the second novel of Time in the River, this is where where Wolfe and Perkins had the most difficulty, because when Look, Homeward Angel came out, it was a big hit, and it really made Wolfe a celebrity, literary celebrity, and it was very well received. And so everybody was waiting for his second novel, including Perkins and the people at Scribner's. They wanted him to get out a second novel while he was a hot literary commodity. And he immediately started writing, but his writing was going in a number of different directions, and he couldn't get it under control. And it was mushrooming to thousands and thousands of pages. There's a photo of him with the manuscript, and it's in a big crate, and he has his foot on the edge of the crate, and he's going through pages in this photo. Finally, so this is going on, first a year, then 2 years, then 3 years, and so finally, I think it was 1933 or 1934. Look, Homeward Angel was published in 1929. Perkins called Wolfe in, and he said, just bring in your manuscript, bring all of it in, bring the whole crate in, and we'll just see where you are. Wolfe brought it in, but he was very nervous at this point about the whole thing, because he told Perkins, it's not ready. I'm not ready for you to see it. He didn't really want to do this. But Perkins realized, I think, something has to be done, or else this was going to go on forever. So Perkins called him in and basically said, go away now and let me look at it, and then we'll see what we've got. And from that massive manuscript, what Perkins did was pick one section of it that became of Time in the River. And then there was lots of material left over that Wolfe could use later on as short stories, and also as the manuscripts that he used in the later novels that were published posthumously.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So to get back to his youth, here he is growing up. He did mom's running a boarding house for people with tuberculosis. Now, is that where Thomas Wolfe picked up tuberculosis, which ultimately killed him off?
No, well, that would just
be not known
speculation. Technically, you were not allowed to stay at Julia Wolfe's boarding house if you had tuberculosis. So they were not currently ill with it, although some say that she was a little bit lax on that.
I see.
And
Okay.
so I don't think, I mean, I guess it's possible that somehow got into his system and then later came out. Now, he died of tubercular meningitis. So it was in his brain, in his skull, not traditional tuberculosis as we think of it.
Gotcha. So he heads off to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He becomes a Tar Heel, and he develops a passion for writing in theater. So did he? Is that where he discovered the passion, or while he was still a young, pre-college? Did he know he wanted to write? Was he doing some writing, or was it not until he went to UNC that he realized, wow, this is my direction in life?
He was doing some writing before that, and his teacher, Mrs. Roberts, encouraged that. But it really was at UNC that he realized he wanted to be a playwright. That was what he wanted to do. And he wrote plays there, and they were produced there. And so his plan at that time was not to be a novelist, but to be a playwright.
And he end up doing some plays or not? And were any of them, if he did, were any of them notable?
He went from the University of North Carolina to Harvard, where he studied playwriting under a great professor of it, George Pierce Baker, who had also worked with Eugene O'Neill. And he wrote plays there. And then after Harvard, he moved to New York City, hoping to get these plays bought and produced. And it just never happened. So he has some plays, and I have seen some of them, some of them every once in a while, like one in Asheville, a theater there did his play, Welcome to Our City. And I saw it. I mean, they're good plays in a way, but that was just not where his skills were. And you can see why, because, even the discussion we've had about the novels with that kind of effusive style, that doesn't work so well for plays where control and, in a play, every word counts and you can't just go on and on. And so Wolfe had trouble putting that big output into something as controlled and short as a play. So he finally switched from being a playwright to being a novelist.
Okay, so he knew that was really what considering his writing style, he realized that's where I belong. 1920. So he headed to Harvard in 1920, must have graduated around 22, 23. Mm-hmm. It was 1929, he publishes his debut novel and most famous novel, Look, Homeward Angel, as we were talking about. How big a debut novel was that? How did the critics and how did the buying public regard it?
They regarded it very highly. It was an immediate success. I mean, what Wolfe was doing was very different from what anybody else was doing. It was really, and it sold well. Wolfe was suddenly famous and invited to parties and, all this sort of thing, which was, had good and bad elements of it. This fame he had, he had to deal with. But the book came out in October of 1929. And in that same publishing season, Ernest Hemingway's novel, A Farewell to Arms, came out. And William Faulkner's novel, The Sound and the Fury, came out.
Wow.
3 of those writers were still new writers. They had, Hemingway and Faulkner had published before, but they were still young and up and coming writers. And Look, Homeward Angel did better than The Sound and the Fury did in terms of sales and even reviews. So it was a very successful launch. Now, if you remember, what else happened in October of 1929 is the stock market crash and the beginning of the Depression. So that was a problem, because something that big was kind of overwhelmed people's traditional ideas about being entertained, and so that was obviously a horrible thing for the country, and even for Wolfe's relatives, such as his mother, who lost a lot because she was so invested in real estate and so on down in Asheville. So it was a hard time for Wolfe's family and a hard time for the country. So it's kind of just strange that Wolfe was having the best success of his life at the same time that this tragic event was happening historically and with his family.
Yeah, exactly. Give us your thumbnail summary of Look Homeward Angel for those of the listeners who have not read it. What's kind of the just a nutshell summary?
I think you could call it a coming of age novel in a way. It really follows the life of the protagonist, Eugene Gant, who is autobiographically connected with Wolfe himself. They're in Asheville, which is called Altamont in that novel. And it really goes from birth through the time he is about ready to go to Harvard. So it covers all of that, all that we have been saying about the boarding house and his father and the stonecutter shop and the school that that Eugene Gant goes to, and then all of the townspeople. It really gives you this vivid sense of small town life in America in that era, that early 1900s. So the townspeople, the feel of the town itself, you just feel like you have been there. This is one thing that really attracted me to the novel when I first read it. Is I've had few literary experiences where I have just felt so immersed in the world, like I had not just read about it, but I'd really been there.
Interesting. So my understanding is that throughout his career, he maintained a close professional relationship with Max Perkins, despite these epic battles that they had. What can you tell us about how they worked together? Now, this was not the age of sending an electronic manuscript via email. These were print pages. Did all this work have to be done face to face, or did he sometimes copy a manuscript? And I don't even know how difficult it was at the time to copy a manuscript and send a copy off to the editor. How did they work together? Can you give us some insights into that?
Yes, they worked in person together on much of this, especially with Of Time in the River, which is his second novel. Now, let me just say with O Loss, which became Look Homeward Angel, by the time Perkins received that manuscript, it was complete and typed and everything. It was a full manuscript. But then with Of Time in the River, Perkins was, as I described earlier, working with this massive manuscript that had developed over the course of years. So their working relationship was a little bit different with those two novels. But let's just take Of Time in the River. And Wolfe describes this, by the way, in what became a short book called The Story of a Novel, where he describes his collaboration with Perkins. Wolfe loved Perkins and really respected him. Perkins was really a father figure to Wolfe, and Wolfe really trusted him. So, they argued, but Wolfe really trusted him and ultimately would follow Perkins' advice. And especially at this time. Now they ended up, Wolfe ended up breaking off and going to a different publisher. And I could tell about that in a little while if you want. But during this time, Wolfe lived in different apartments around, but he lived in Brooklyn, he lived in different places, but it was really near Scribner's Publishing there in Manhattan. So he would go to Scribner's office, go to Perkins' office, and they would sit and work this out. For a lot of Time in the River, they would do this, they would meet after the workday when Perkins had finished his work, because, Wolfe was just one of his authors and he had other things to do, but they would meet each day and get through a little bit more of the manuscript. Perkins was always wanting to cut things. That's mainly what he did as an editor. He wasn't so much changing line by line, but he would say, this section doesn't really fit, so why don't we take this out? And then they would argue about it, and then they would take it out. Or sometimes Perkins would say, go home and cut 10,000 words from this section and then bring it back tomorrow. And sometimes what Wolfe would do is he would go home, and the next day he would come back and he had added 10,000 words. So it was just, Wolfe had trouble with this, but they did work it out. And I love Of Time in the River. I mean, it came out, I think it's just a wonderful book. Now, it did, because of the way it went, it did end up having a lot of typos in it in the first edition. And, because of all this changing and revision and what Wolfe thought was kind of hurrying things along too much. And Wolfe was still nervous when the manuscript was just finally taken away from him, and Perkins said it's ready to go. So the first edition especially had more mistakes in it than you would normally see in a novel, but their collaboration, I think, was ultimately a success because it came up with a really good book.
Now, so it's very stubborn. Do you know whether Hemingway and Fitzgerald also were very proprietary and resistant to Max Perkins? I don't know that they didn't write their manuscripts as long as Thomas Wolfe did, presumably, but were they also resistant to the idea of taking any sections out or words out?
No, they didn't. They had a very different working relationship with Perkins than Wolfe did. And they weren't, for the most part, they were not right there in New York, in his office. They were all over the place, and they would send the manuscripts. Now, Perkins had trouble with them in different ways. Fitzgerald would be in debt a lot. He would need to borrow money. He'd need to borrow against advances and things. So, I mean, they had their own troubles, but they were different troubles than Wolfe had. Perkins wanted his authors to know each other and be friends and help one another. So he set up different meetings between them. So Wolfe knew Fitzgerald and he knew Hemingway, and he actually was with Fitzgerald, or they ran into each other. They were in France at the same time for a while and hung out together and got along well enough. With Hemingway, Wolfe and Hemingway did not like each other as much. Hemingway, I think, particularly didn't like Wolfe that much, although he didn't hate him or anything. They just didn't hit it off that well. And I think Hemingway in particular was a little bit jealous of how much time Perkins spent on Wolfe, and Hemingway thought he was a better writer. Hemingway thought Hemingway was a better writer than Wolfe. So there were little tensions like that. But Perkins,
really different style, though, right? I mean, Hemingway was all about economy and declarative sentences, and Thomas Wolfe was sprawling and effusive.
Yes, and there's a great exchange of letters between Fitzgerald and Wolfe on that very issue. And this is later in Wolfe's life, but he had met with Fitzgerald, and Fitzgerald wrote him a letter that really calls on Wolfe to be more concise in his writing, to be more controlled. And so he writes this letter, and Wolfe wrote back to him and defended what his style was. And the terminology he uses is, Wolfe said, there are putter inners and taker outers. And Wolfe is a putter-inner. In other words, he puts things in the books. And it's not all just about taking everything out and being concise and controlled and everything. And so he really rejected what Fitzgerald was trying to get him to do. It's not that Wolfe was trying to be that and was failing. It's that he rejected that way of thinking about what fiction was.
Yeah, there's additive artists and there's subtractive artists, and he was obviously an additive artist, where Hemingway was subtractive, or Fitzgerald. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about You Can't Go Home Again. It was one of his most famous novels, but it was published posthumously in 1940. He died in 1938, so 2 years later it's published after Thomas Wolfe's death. Was it a completed manuscript, or did they have to try to connect some dots after his death?
They had to connect some dots. What happened was that Wolfe had switched from Perkins and Scribner's to Harper and Brothers, with his editor being Edward Aswell. And there were a number of reasons why he did that. But one big reason was that I mentioned to you earlier the book, The Story of a Novel. It's a short book that Scribner's published, and it tells this story of collaboration between Perkins and Wolfe. Wolfe is very honest in that book about what he did, about what Perkins did. He's very open about it. And some critics attacked Wolfe for what he reveals in that book. And one critic in particular, named Bernard DeVoto, wrote an article called "Genius is Not Enough." And what he says is that Wolfe is not truly an artist, because he would just spew out this mountain of words, and Perkins and what DeVoto called the assembly line at Scribner's would turn it into a novel. It's not a fair assessment of what happened. It's an exaggeration. It's, overdone. But Wolfe was really sensitive to criticism, and that criticism, not just that one particular article, but that whole idea that he was too dependent on Perkins, made him want to switch to a different publisher. And as I say, there were other factors involved there too. So he switched, and he got a really good deal, big advance, $10,000 advance from Harper's, and started writing for Edward Aswell, came up with another huge manuscript, kind of like Time in the River manuscript had been. And then he was exhausted from all this writing, but it wasn't finished. He just came to a stopping point, and he told Aswell, "I'm going pretty much on a vacation." He also he had some speaking engagements at Purdue University and elsewhere, and he was going out to Seattle, and he was going on he ended up doing a tour of the national parks. He told Aswell, "Take my manuscript and I'll be back and I'll finish it up and you'll have your novel." Well, he went on this trip, gave his speeches, so on, went to Seattle, and that's where he got sick. So this is 1938 in the summer, and he became ill there. And at first they didn't know what was wrong, because it was very strange. So they treated him in different ways. Eventually they decided he had to be taken to Johns Hopkins University Hospital in Baltimore. He had to be taken by train across the country. He went there and died. Dr. Walter Dandy was a surgeon that they thought might be able to help him, but when he operated on Wolfe, he realized this disease had spread so much in his head that there was nothing that could be done. So he just, put his skull back, in order, and he died a few days later. So, so this is horrible, of course, on a personal level, but also for Aswell. here he has this manuscript that is not finished, and it's huge, and the author is no longer living. So, and here's another complication. Wolfe had made Perkins the literary executor. So Aswell had to work with Perkins to get a novel manuscript out of this. So that's what happened. So Aswell started working on it with Perkins' help and came up eventually with the two novels, The Web and the Rock, and then You Can't Go Home Again. And then there was also a lot of other material. One of them became the book, The Hills Beyond. And then there were other material, short stories and so on, that also came out of this huge manuscript. But because it wasn't finished, Aswell had to do a lot of editing. And his editing has been controversial because of how much he had to do and what he did. I think he did, so you have people on different ends of the spectrum. I mean, some defend completely what Aswell did, and others on the other end of the spectrum say, no, it's literary fraud. It was terrible. These should not even be considered Wolfe's novels. I'm more on the end of defending Aswell because I think, he was in a tough spot and he did the best he could. And I think they're both really good novels. And so I think that's about all you could ask from him given the situation. But that's why the story, those books were published after Wolfe's death.
So The Web and the Rock also was posthumously published?
Yes, it came out of that manuscript that Wolfe had left for Aswell at his death.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So did his parents live long enough to see his success and fame?
His mother did. His father died before that, and he writes about fictionally his father's death in Of Time in the River. So his father died in the 1920s, but his mother lived until 1945. So she was, there and saw all of it and was part of it. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Talk about the themes in Thomas Wolfe's writing. Now, you may have already covered this ground, but if you were to kind of summarize the most significant themes in his works, how would you identify them?
Wolfe gets at the sense of what it is like to be alive, what it is like to live day to day, and how we experience the reality around us. I know that sounds kind of vague, but that's really what it is. So, and I think that's really the appeal of it for people who love Wolfe. I remember the first time I read Look, Homeward Angel, there's so many times you're reading it and you're seeing the reaction of Eugene Gant to something that's happening to him. Somebody is misunderstanding him, or he's feeling left out, or he's feeling that something unjust has happened to him. And you think, yes, that's exactly the way that feels. That's exactly what it's like. And then in Of Time in the River, it's also Eugene Gant, and he's just going through more of life. It just really continues the story. So these are characters that are just easy to identify with and relate to, at least for me and people who love Wolfe. As we've talked about, they're not plot oriented. So you're not always waiting for some big thing to happen, or for a mystery to be solved, or for a death, or something like that. It really is much more the day-to-day existence of this character and the places that he is and all that he experiences, the whole range of emotions from exultation to despair. And these are big characters, and they have that wide range that they experience.
Now, Thomas Wolfe obviously has stood the test of time, but how is he regarded today versus then? How widely studied is he in universities and English literature departments and so on? What would you say about his sustainability?
He is not as widely taught and studied or known as he once was. And compared to Hemingway or Fitzgerald, who are still widely, they have stood the test of time in a sense better than Wolfe, Faulkner. Those writers in Wolfe's day and even in later times were on a more equal basis. I think that Wolfe's still popular, but one thing that's difficult about teaching Wolfe, and this may sound, to me it almost sounds trivial, but I think it has made a difference, is Wolfe is harder to put into a course syllabus if you're going to teach the novels. And as a professor, I know the problem of this but even like if you take high school curriculum, many students read The Great Gatsby by Fitzgerald in high school. Well, it's 120 pages long. It fits very well into a course syllabus. If you're going to do Look, Homeward Angel, it's 700 pages long. That's harder to do. So I think one thing that has hurt Wolfe, just in practical terms, is the length of his manuscripts. Now, there have been some short stories. I teach The Lost Boy, one of his short stories, in my American Lit course. And it goes over very well. Students love it. And some of them will become fans of Wolfe at that point and want to read more about him, or they'll join the Thomas Wolfe Society. We have the Thomas Wolfe Society that's devoted to the study of Wolfe. And so there's a group of readers around the world who really love Wolfe and are devoted to him. But I would say in the culture at large, he is not as popular as we wish he would be in the Wolfe Society, or that he once was.
So you're on the board of the Thomas Wolfe Society, and is it the Thomas Wolfe Society that produces the Thomas Wolfe Review?
Yes, it's part of what we do.
So tell us about what turned you into a fan and scholar of Thomas Wolfe. I mean, did you read his work and he became a favorite author, and you wanted to study him more deeply? Was that the starting point? I noticed I mentioned at the top that you wrote your dissertation on Thomas Wolfe. So talk about how you became a fan of his and a scholar.
What happened was this is in the 1980s. There was a movie called Sophie's Choice. Meryl Streep is in it. And Wolfe is mentioned in that movie. I saw that movie and I was in grad school at the time, and I thought, I haven't read much Thomas Wolfe. I should read something by him. So I got Look, Homeward Angel, and it just blew me away. I thought, wow, why hasn't anyone told me about this? It's so good. Not long after that, I happened to be in Asheville, North Carolina on vacation. And I knew by that time that Wolfe's home there, the boarding house, Julia Wolfe's boarding house, was now a museum to Wolfe. You can take a tour of it. It's a Thomas Wolfe Memorial. There's a building next to it that's kind of the museum part, and then you can take tours of the house. So I did that not long after I read Look, Homeward Angel, and I was just blown away, because it was just like walking into the novel. When you go into that house, you can go into it today, and it's just an amazing experience if you've read the book, because you're just looking around and remembering all these scenes and all the things that happen here and there in the house. And so I was really hooked on Wolfe at that point. And that was just about the time that it was time for me. I had finished my master's degree. I was starting the PhD, and I needed to choose a topic to write about. And it just so happened that one of the great Wolfe scholars, Leslie Field, was at Purdue. I didn't know him. I had never taken him for a course, but I introduced myself to him and said, would you be interested in directing a dissertation on Thomas Wolfe? And so he did a directed study with me, and then agreed to direct the dissertation. So I was very grateful that he was there. He was a great mentor to me for that project.
So tell us about the Thomas Wolfe Review and its purpose and its contents. What kind of contents does it have? The purpose, I assume the purpose is to keep Thomas Wolfe's work, his writing alive. But tell me more if there's more to it, and what kind of contents does it do you publish from? What is it, quarterly, monthly, how often?
Yearly, pretty much. Although
yearly, okay.
we combine 2 years. That's what we've been doing lately. Is we'll have an issue, a fatter issue that covers a 2-year period. The Wolfe Review, it's a combination of things. That part of it is scholarly articles. So that's the part that I work with the art as an articles editor. I send submissions out to consulting editors, and so we're peer reviewed, and so that we have just scholarly articles on Wolfe. Then there are feature sections in there that may be people who've written poetry about Wolfe, or people who have some other popular culture aspect of Wolfe. And then there are sections where if Wolfe is mentioned, let's say in a television show or something like that, people will keep track of that, and those things will be mentioned in there. So it's a really great journal for all of these different aspects of Wolfe, everything from more high-end scholarly treatment of him to just one of his novels was mentioned on a TV show or something. So that's what the review is. And we have really good, I'm just a small part of it, but we have really good people running it, and so it's a very nice product that they produce.
Now, you yourself, you're the author of 11 books, as I had mentioned during the intro. And I'm not familiar with your writing, Joseph. Tell us what you write. Is it fiction? Is it nonfiction? Is it both? And what is the subject matter?
I've done lots of different types of things. So I've written 4 novels. The first novel I did was a fantasy novel. And then I did 3 contemporary realistic novels. And then I switched to some nonfiction books that are on various issues of Christian spirituality. So that's what those are about the last 7 books that I've done have been on those types of issues like waiting, spiritual issues that I deal with myself. I will make that the subject of a book, and it gives me a chance to research these things and then also write about them for readers, hoping that it's helpful to them. So that these things they're not related to Wolfe or even my scholarly work. They're more, related to my spiritual life. So those are the things that I've published.
Well, you are a professor at Azusa Pacific University, which is a private evangelical Christian university in Azusa, California. I'm reading right off the website, and founded in 1899. So do you also teach spiritually based or Christian or spiritually based classes in addition to the literature classes?
In a sense, I do about half my teaching load in the English department. It's where I do literature courses for the most part and some writing courses. And then the other half of my load I do in the Honors College. And the Honors College is more of a great works program. So we do everything, we do. Right now I'm teaching Thomas Aquinas, and then we're going to go to Dante, the Divine Comedy, and Teresa of Avila. So we do all these great works. We also do Jane Eyre, and we do Frankenstein. It's a wide variety of things. So I do about half and half of those types. So I don't teach theology or something like that, except in the honors college when we have a theological text. It's a combination of philosophical text, theological, and fiction, poetry.
Now, was Thomas Wolfe a religious or spiritual man?
No, he wasn't. His family was in the Presbyterian church, but he was not a practicing Christian, was not a believer.
Was he an agnostic or atheist? Did he ever declare what he was in that regard?
No, I don't think so. My understanding is he pretty much avoided getting into it. I don't think he was an atheist. I don't sense that. And, people have tried to make different arguments about faith that he might have had, but I don't really think so. I think the evidence is just that he didn't really, it was not much of a concern to him, but I think he did not believe in any religion.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So if you were to have to pick one of Thomas Wolfe's novels, which of his works was the one that stood out most to you, the one that you cherish the most?
Look, Homeward Angel, without a doubt. It's really, I think, the best one and the one I just have the most affection for.
And his first one at that. So yeah. His first one was his best in your regard. Well, then also it is his most famous piece. Mm-hmm. What do you think came closest to matching that in his three subsequent novels?
I like Of Time in the River also. Now, I don't know, that would probably not be the consensus there's no real consensus, but I think a lot of people a lot of people see problems with that book, but I also love that book. I think a lot of people might say You Can't Go Home Again would be second in terms of quality or however you want to rate it. But I like Of Time in the River.
So Look, Homeward Angel was very much a memoir, really. And today you see novelists who pretty obviously are writing a memoir and calling it a novel. Was there anybody at the time, was that an issue at all? Did people say, well, this is really, it's not really a novel, it's an autobiography or a memoir? Or was that, did that mean nothing to people really?
I think that the people that reacted to it more as an autobiography, well, one group was the people in Asheville who were very offended by this novel. And really, Wolfe got nasty letters and threats. And, one woman wrote them this letter that said if he ever came back to Asheville, she would drag his overgrown carcass across the town square and all this sort of thing. So they were very shocked and offended by it. And Wolfe did not go back for 7 years. So they really did see it in very personal terms. And Wolfe was surprised by this. I think he didn't realize, just wasn't on his mind that they would respond that way. He thought they would, be very happy that Asheville was in a book like this, and he just saw things differently in terms of that. But it took him a while to go back, and he was accepted well when he came back. But by then that had faded. But I think now there were later scholars and critics who criticized Wolfe for being too autobiographical, and that criticism comes up sometimes where they will say he can only do autobiography. He's really not capable of writing anything except his own experience. And I think that's overblown as well. And I've even written about that myself in some articles that, there were things that he did that were beyond autobiography, that were successful, but that's really what he is known for.
My guest has been Joseph Bentz, again, a professor of American literature at Azusa Pacific University, articles editor at the Thomas Wolfe Review, and a board member at the Thomas Wolfe Society. And as you hear, a real expert on Thomas Wolfe. Joseph, thank you so much for taking the time. It's really interesting. And there's no question I asked that you didn't have facility with. So I really appreciate your time and your expertise.
Thanks so much. It's been a lot of fun to talk about this.